My name is Tim Tongana. Welcome to A News. Here are the headlines. U.S. President Donald Trump says talks with Iran will resume after cancelling a planned massive military strike. The U.S. and Japan intervened to prop up the value of the yuan in a rare joint move. 2 die in Greece while Türkiye makes multiple arrests as the wildfires in southern Europe continue. All right, we begin with this developing story. U.S. President Donald Trump says he has had new talks with Iran will begin later on this Monday after he called off what he calls a massive strike attack that was planned on the country. Trump said he had been asked by Gulf allies to give diplomacy another chance. Iran has denied making any appeals to the U.S.
U.S. President Donald Trump says the United States is returning to the negotiating table with Iran after calling off plans for a major military strike. Speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One, Trump said talks would begin on Monday afternoon. He claimed the U.S. had been preparing what he described as the biggest attack since World War II, but decided to hold back after appeals from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and, he said, Iran.
I was asked to by Saudi Arabia, by UAE, and by Qatar, and by Iran. We were all set to go just about at this time right now, and it would have been a massive attack. We were all set to go, but when the allies ask to call it off, you got to sort of say, well, let's see. And the reason they asked is I think there's a deal. There's a deal on Hormuz, and then there will be a deal on the nuclear, or you might call it the denuclearization of Iran. I call it the denuclearization of Iran.
However, Iran rejected Trump's claim that it asked Washington to cancel the planned strikes. State and semi-official media dismissed the comments as false, insisting Tehran had made no such request. Meanwhile, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said negotiations with Oman over arrangements for the Strait of Hormuz are in their final stages. Iranian officials stressed the talks are focused on shipping routes and do not amount to an agreement to fully reopen the strategic waterway. The strait remains at the center of the crisis after months of conflict between Iran and the United States disrupted one of the world's most important energy corridors. Despite Trump's optimism, it remains unclear where Monday's talks will take place, who will attend, or whether they will produce a broader agreement on Iran's nuclear program.
Now, the OPEC Plus group of oil-producing nations says it will increase output from next month. 7 member countries have agreed to boost supplies onto world markets. The decision was made during an online meeting with Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iraq, Kuwait, Kazakhstan, Algeria and Oman attending. OPEC Plus said the increase is part of a plan to ease voluntary production cuts announced in April 2023. The cuts totaled 1.65 million barrels per day and will remain in place until the end of 2026. This is the 6th month in a row that OPEC Plus has increased production. The group said it may change output if market conditions change. Members will meet again on 6 September to decide production levels for October. Türkiye and Iraq have signed a 1-year agreement to keep the Iraq-Türkiye crude oil pipeline in operation while negotiations continue on a long-term framework. The deal signed in Ankara by Türkiye's state pipeline operator Botas and Iraq's state oil companies Somo and NOC keeps open a key export route with a daily capacity of up to 750,000 barrels of crude oil. Turkish energy minister called the pipeline a strategic energy corridor, saying it strengthens bilateral cooperation and global energy security as Gulf disruptions continue demand an increase for alternative export routes. He added that Türkiye hopes to expand the pipeline's use in future, potentially transporting crude from Iraq and other Gulf producers. Over to Gaza now. At least 18 people are reported killed in Gaza following the latest wave of Israeli strikes, with refugee camps coming under fire. It comes as negotiations continue efforts to move forward with the next phase of the ceasefire agreement.
Israeli airstrikes struck several areas across Gaza on Sunday, with attacks reported from the north to the south of the Strip. That's according to local authorities. Mahmoud Bassal, spokesperson for Gaza's civil defense, said Israeli drones and helicopters carried out more than 10 strikes. He said residential apartments, tents sheltering displaced people, civilian vehicles and gatherings were hit. Local sources said those killed included Kamal Abu Muaylik, identified as a Hamas commander, and his wife, who died when their apartment in Deir al-Bala was targeted. Residents searched through the debris, disillusioned about the future.
They said there was a truce, but where is the truce? This truce is just us, collecting corpses, collecting flesh, collecting brains, dismembered men and hands. Why?
Hamas calls on mediators and guarantors of the ceasefire agreement to take action, accusing Israel of violating the deal. The strikes have also drawn international reaction. Turkey's foreign ministry said Israel's continued strikes show that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government has no intention of making peace with the Palestinians. In a statement, the ministry accused Netanyahu's government of seeking to displace Palestinians from their homeland and prevent peace and stability in the region. The ministry called on the international community to take a stronger stance against what it described as Netanyahu's expansionist and militarist approach. The attacks came after Hamas said it had agreed to the latest version of a roadmap for the second phase of the ceasefire agreement following negotiations. Israel had not immediately commented on the strikes.
A former senior Israeli defense official says Israel should seize what he describes as an historic opportunity to pursue agreements with Lebanon and Syria.
Former Brigadier General Dror Shalom, who until recently headed the Political Military Bureau at Israel's Ministry of Defense and now a senior advisor at JP Morgan, has called on Israel to pursue understandings with Syria and an agreement with Lebanon that could lead to Hezbollah's disarmament. Speaking in an interview, Shalom described developments on Israel's northern front as a historic opportunity.
Syria and Lebanon. This is an historic opportunity. The Syrian president, of course, I'm suspicious of him, but he needs the Americans. We have to create maybe some sort of understandings with him. You can create a real change. And also in Lebanon, we can reach an agreement with them and then dismantle Hezbollah of its arms.
Shalom also called for international forces to be deployed along the Lebanese border to act against Hezbollah, rather than relying on the current UN peacekeeping mission. He said Israel should cut Hezbollah's supply chain through Syria and take the initiative before other countries forced it to accept decisions it did not want. According to Shalom, Israel's military capabilities were impressive, but military power alone would not be sufficient without strategic planning and political initiatives. Shalom said Israel needed to define the desired endpoint before committing military forces and conducting further operations. Turning to Gaza, Shalom described the return of the hostages as a moral obligation. He thanked US President Donald Trump and those who protested in support of the hostages. Asked whether the hostages could have been brought back earlier, Shalom said decisions could have been taken sooner and that more hostages could have returned. He said Israel should now advance Trump's 20-point plan for Gaza and create an alternative to Hamas. Shalom added that Israel should work with Jordan, Egypt and Gulf countries to build an initiative supported by Arab states. On Iran, he supported the military attack on Iran's nuclear capabilities, describing it as the correct decision. He also argued that Israel should deepen the Abraham Accords and expand cooperation with countries including Azerbaijan, Cyprus, Greece and Japan, as well as European and Nordic states.
Now, Russia and Ukraine have exchanged fresh attacks with new casualties and damage reported on both sides. Here's the latest on the story.
Russian officials say Ukrainian forces launched an air attack on Belgorod on Monday. They said more than 1,600 attacks had killed 14 civilians and injured more than 100 on the wider region over the past week. 3 civilians were killed and 2 wounded in a separate overnight attack on the Russian-controlled Crimean Peninsula, according to its Russia-installed governor. In the Vladimir region, Russian retailer Wildberries said one of its logistics facilities was hit. Staff were evacuated to safety with no casualties reported. Russia's transport ministry said drone strikes on vessels had heightened tensions in the Sea of Azov, and that measures were being taken to maintain freight traffic in the Azov Black Sea basin. Moscow also claimed its forces struck 3 ships carrying military goods in Ukraine's part of the Black Sea, and a cargo vessel at the port of Mykolaiv. The developments followed deadly Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities on Sunday. 8 Russian-guided bombs struck Zaporizhia within 90 minutes on Sunday. That's according to regional governor Ivan Fedorov. A 71-year-old woman was killed and 31 people were injured, while homes, vehicles and other buildings were damaged, according to local authorities.
I feel sorry for the children, that children are dying and people are dying. They are left with nothing. That's the worst thing in life.
In Slovyansk, 3 people were killed and 4 injured when another guided bomb struck the city centre, destroying a house and damaging the surrounding area.
All right, staying with the story, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the United States will seek to restart peace talks between Russia and Ukraine in the coming weeks. In an interview with Fox News, Rubio said Washington is looking for opportunities to revive negotiations, but acknowledged that both sides continue to hold firm positions that remain difficult to reconcile.
You're going to see some efforts over the next few weeks to see if we can't restart talks between the 2 sides and bring this war to an end. But we also understand that both sides have some pretty strong red lines, and until we can bring those red lines a little closer together, we're not going to be there yet. But we're ready to go, and the president's told his team, if you see an opportunity to be a force that brings about some momentum behind peace talks, let's do it.
For more on the story, I'm joined by Dmitry Burtsev from Moscow. He is a member of the Middle East and North Africa Editors Network. Thank you for joining me and welcome to A News, Mr. Dmitry.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
So the U.S. has tried to bring Russia and Ukraine towards negotiations before without producing lasting breakthroughs. So why should these latest diplomatic plans pushed by Washington be taken seriously this time around?
I think we are far away from peace between Russia and Ukraine. And when discussing the prospects for peace in Ukraine, it's important to separate political rhetoric from strategic reality. Every side publicly speaks about peace, but successful negotiations require more than declarations. They require conditions, and in which both parties believe diplomacy serves their national interests better than continuing the conflict. And we see that both Russia and Ukraine, they are far away from having mutual ideas on stopping the war. And the United States, of course, remains one of the key actors capable of influencing the diplomatic process. Without the United States of America, without the administration of the US President, Donald Trump, it cannot be stop the war. So if Washington genuinely seeking a negotiated settlement rather than simply managing the conflict, this could open an important diplomatic window. However, mediation can only succeed if all parties believe their fundamental security concerns will be addressed. And not only the Ukrainian side or the Russian side, also the European Union. If the European Union won't be part of these negotiations, won't be part of any peaceful agreements, the war won't stop. Because now the situation is becoming not only as a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, it's becoming a conflict also between Russia and European Union and NATO. Because what we see right now, that if the war won't stop this year, and some political analysts and experts are saying that this war could last until 2030, it means that the situation could be dangerous for not only Ukraine, but for Baltic countries, for post-Soviet Union countries, and for Europe. Because today the situation is kind of dangerous, because we see daily attacks on Russia, we see daily attacks on Russian infrastructure, and at the same time we see daily attacks from the Russian side on Ukrainian infrastructure as a kind of revenge from what Ukrainian is doing inside Russia. Because now we see that there is huge pressure on Russian economy, not only from Ukrainian side because they are attacking by drones Russian structure, but also from the European Union. We see it, and we can consider that if there will be no peaceful talks, it means that this war will last for more than 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, and it could be end up with a big war between Russia and European Union.
Now, you reiterate what U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said with respect to how difficult it is to reconcile the two countries, which remain firm then on their positions. So what are the biggest obstacles that are keeping Moscow and Kiev apart?
I think the political position of both parties, because today Russia and the Russian President Vladimir Putin cannot end this war easily without solving the situation of the lands that Russia took and it became part of Russia after 2022. So we're talking about Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, Kherson. So you cannot find a solution easily. And Russia and Russian side, they cannot repeat what happened in the Minsk agreements in 2014. They want to find a solution for the roots of the conflict. If they won't find, and both parties, Russian and Ukraine, won't find a solution for the roots of the conflict could repeat after maybe 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. It could be just a permanent situation where there is like kind of permanent negotiations to stop the war, or agreements that won't last for a long period of time. So it's very important to find solutions for the roots of the conflict. It's not only about the political changes that happened 2013 in Euromaidan, Ukraine. It's also about the situation of the collapse of Soviet Union, because we know after the collapse of Soviet Union, several wars happened in Caucasus region, in Chechnya, between Russia and Georgia, and now we see between Russia and Ukraine. So it should be a solution that could make all parties of the conflict, European Union, Ukrainian side, and also Russian side, that they have like agreement on stopping the conflict, on also removing the sanctions on the Russian economy, and stopping the pressure on Russian economy, and also on finding a solution regarding the lands that Russia took after 2022 and it became part of Russia, because also the conflict is not only about the political position of Ukraine, but it's also about problem of lands, that Russia see these lands as a historical part of Russian Federation, and as Vladimir Putin saying it, that is historically Russian land. So also there should be a solution for this case, because it's not easy to find a solution right now, because as we see, both parties, both sides, they still see that the only solution is on the land of the war, the warfare. It's the only solution to take more lands and take more position on the land in order to go after that to negotiations. It's both strategy, both sides' strategy.
All right, one last question to you, Mr. Dmitry. Could Moscow use the prospect of these talks as a way to buy time and ease international pressure? You mentioned that perhaps one of their requirements would be to take away the sanctions, or is it to consolidate territorial gains?
I think territorial gains are important for the Russian President Vladimir Putin nowadays. He cannot stop it easily, cannot stop the conflict easily without territorial gains on the land. And if we're talking about Russian position, from Moscow perspective, the conflict extends beyond Ukraine itself. So Russian officially consistently describe it as a part of a broader European security issue involving NATO's military expansion. So it's not only about Ukraine, it's also about the position of NATO countries. It's also about the position of European Union to find a solution with the Russian side. If you're talking about France, if you're talking about Germany, if you're talking about the countries, that they became part of this conflict also because they supporting the Ukrainian side by sending military equipment and also giving intelligence information regarding the warfare.
Mr. Dmitry, thank you so much for always making time for A News. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, after the break, 2 die in Greece while Türkiye makes multiple arrests as the wildfires in southern Europe continue. Welcome back to A News. Now, Japan and the US say they are ready to take further action after intervening jointly to support the yen for the first time in 15 years. The move follows growing concern over the decline of the Japanese currency and its impact on the country's economy.
During New York trading on Friday, Japanese and US authorities entered the currency market to buy yen, increasing demand for the currency and pushing up its value against the dollar. The action came after the yen fell to almost 164 to the dollar on the 23rd of July, its weakest level in around 40 years. It was their first coordinated currency operation since 2011, when they intervened in the opposite direction to weaken the yen following the earthquake in eastern Japan.
Japan's Ministry of Finance is closely monitoring the situation and remains in close communication with the US Treasury Department. We will not hesitate to conduct further coordinated intervention if necessary.
The yen climbed to around 157 against the dollar during New York trading following the intervention. A weaker yen increases the cost of Japan's imports, adding to inflation and putting further pressure on household finances. President Donald Trump described the US intervention as a signal of friendship, saying Japan had requested support as the yen weakened. He also said the action was good for the global economy. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Washington was prepared to participate in another joint intervention if needed. He also called for an expansion of a Federal Reserve facility that allows foreign central banks to borrow dollars temporarily against US Treasury securities held at the New York Fed.
Hungary is bracing for a severe energy crisis as extreme heat and drought force the country's only nuclear power plant to shut down. The facility is halting operations for the first time in over 40 years after the Danube River, which is used to cool the reactors, dropped to record lows. With temperatures expected to reach 40 degrees Celsius this week, the government is considering restricting the supply of energy to major consumers to stop the grid from collapsing.
We are facing the most critical 5 days ahead. Tomorrow, the PAX power plant will not be generating electricity, while the hottest 40-degree days are ahead. The power grid, our public services, and ourselves will all come under enormous strain. The Protection Working Group will meet again today. And based on the current consumption, production, import, and water level data, it will decide whether mandatory consumption restrictions will be necessary for large companies from tomorrow. The government decree required to order the mandatory reduction in consumption came into force yesterday, and we will apply it if necessary.
Türkiye has stepped up its response to its recent devastating wildfires, with prosecutors investigating dozens of forest blazes across the country. The authorities say multiple suspects have been arrested. Adam Marrow reports from Istanbul.
Turkish Justice Minister Hakan Gürlek says judicial investigations are underway into 44 separate forest fires that have broken out across 16 provinces since the beginning of June. Writing on social media, Gürlek said prosecutors had identified 29 suspects in connection with the blazes. 6 of those suspects have been arrested, he said, while 9 others have been released under judicial control measures. Another 6 remain in custody pending investigation, according to the Justice Minister. Gürlek noted that investigations were being coordinated by the Justice, Interior, and Agriculture ministries, as prosecutors work with the relevant institutions to determine the cause of the fires. He said the Department of Natural Disasters and Accidents, which functions under the Justice Ministry, was closely monitoring each stage of the judicial process. Gürlek said judicial efforts extend beyond crimes against people and property, but also seek to protect the country's forests, natural resources, and what officials describe as Türkiye's green homeland. The investigations follow one of the country's most destructive wildfire seasons in years. In recent weeks, extreme heat, low humidity, and strong winds have fueled blazes across large parts of the country, especially in the Aegean and Mediterranean regions. These, in turn, have caused large-scale evacuations, have damaged forests, farmland, and homes, and stretched Türkiye's firefighting resources. Last month, 10 people were killed, including forestry workers and rescue personnel, while battling a fast-moving blaze in Eskişehir province, marking the deadliest firefighting incident of the year. Authorities have warned that some fires appear to have been caused by human activity, as prosecutors continue to investigate whether negligence or deliberate acts played a role in the latest outbreaks. This is Adam Marrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Now in Greece, 2 people have died after emergency helicopters collided whilst tackling flames as the wildfires continue across the country. Forest fires have also destroyed thousands of hectares of woodland near a historic French city, Carcassonne.
Greece is continuing to battle major wildfires. The worst situation is in the Attica region, northwest of Athens. Firefighters, helicopters, and local residents are trying to stop the flames from spreading. Despite their efforts, the fire has burned a large area. More than 100 homes have been destroyed in Attica. In the village of Agios Konstantinos, residents tried to save their homes, but many were forced to leave as the fire spread quickly. 2 firefighting helicopters collided while responding to the blaze. Greek authorities say a Greek and a Danish national were killed. A Greek and a British crew member on the other helicopter survived. The cause of the crash is under investigation. Local media say the fire started in the Boeotia region and later spread into Attica. Early reports suggest it may have been caused by sparks from an electricity line. 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of negligence, and another suspect is still being sought. Hundreds of firefighters, specialist vehicles, and firefighting aircraft have been deployed across Greece. France and Romania are also helping with the response. A new wildfire on the popular island of Kefalonia has forced several communities to evacuate.
We are putting out whatever we can in cooperation with the fire department, going wherever they tell us to. What I see is that there are no aerial means, very few planes, no helicopters. It has burned a huge area. The fire, as you know, has left Agios Vasileios in Boeotia. It has reached Megara in the prefecture of Attica, and I imagine it will pass far back to Elefsina and Mandra.
Strong winds near the Gulf of Corinth have made the fire worse. The flames have reached the settlement of Veneza and a military firing range. Emergency crews are trying to stop the fire from reaching the town of Megara. The weather is making firefighting efforts more difficult. The fires in Greece are part of a wider wave of wildfires across Europe this summer. Record heat and very little rain have increased the risk of fires. Scientists say climate change is making these conditions worse. In France and Spain, some fires have eased. However, villages have been destroyed, and hundreds of thousands of people have been forced to leave their homes and holiday accommodation. New fires have also broken out in France's Var region and near the city of Carcassonne. In central Spain, most fires are now under control, but some areas are still seeing flare-ups. A new heat wave is also threatening Hungary. Prime Minister Peter Magyar has warned that the next 5 days will be critical. Hungary's only nuclear power plant has been shut down after water levels in the river Danube fell to a record low. The drought has disrupted shipping and tourism in Hungary. Water restrictions have been introduced in more than 100 towns and villages. In Serbia, the Danube has fallen to its lowest level in decades, reducing the output of the country's largest hydroelectric power plant.
Morocco says it believes close to a dozen people died in last week's mass surge of migrants into the Spanish enclave of Ceuta. But Rabat says it's still verifying reports of deaths on the Spanish side of the border, where Spain says more than 70 people have died.
The aftermath of last week's unprecedented migrant surge into Spain's North African enclave of Ceuta is continuing after more than 50,000 people crossed into the territory by land and sea. More than 48,000 people have since returned to Morocco, while more than 1,000 have been treated by health services. In Ceuta, migrant Mohamed Sahil described the conditions he says many are experiencing.
It's difficult to have a shower, to eat, to drink water. It's very difficult here. Right now, it's very difficult. There are lots of migrants, there are soldiers here, there are police. You can't just go out onto the street in peace.
Migrants who crossed into Ceuta last week spent the night sleeping on a cordoned-off beach and gathered around campfires as police and military patrols remained in the area while authorities worked to restore normality. Police have also completed the installation of a 500-metre floating barrier off Ceuta's border with Morocco to help prevent further crossings. In Madrid, demonstrators gathered outside the Moroccan embassy, protesting what they described as an invasion of migrants into Ceuta.
Defending Spain means defending the nation where we were born, where we grew up, and where we live. Nowadays, it seems that the very idea of defending Spain is considered an offence. Well, no, sir, it is not an offence. We must defend Spain.
Meanwhile, Italy suspended passport-free Schengen travel arrangements with Spain for 1 month. Then 22 European Union member states wrote a letter asking for coordinated action to protect external borders. However, Spain says those people who entered the enclave irregularly could not travel on to mainland Spain or elsewhere in the Schengen zone. Morocco says it remains committed to countering illegal migration and has called for the burden of managing migration to be shared.
Now, Brazil's presidential election campaign has officially begun, with the current leader launching his bid for another term in power. It's expected to be one of the country's most closely contested elections in decades.
Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva accepted his 7th and likely final presidential nomination on Sunday. It's amid mounting pressure from foreign interference ahead of October's elections. At the Workers' Party convention in Sao Paulo, Lula pledged to strengthen Brazil's defense industry and safeguard the country's rare mineral resources, as allies warned of growing foreign interference.
We need to invest in defense. I want us to be prepared so that no one invades this country to take away its president, as they did. I want us to be prepared for peace, not for war. I want us to be prepared so that no one dares to take advantage of us. We need to understand the importance of the defense industry.
Meanwhile, Lula's main challenger, Senator Flavio Bolsonaro, has received public backing from figures including members of US President Donald Trump's administration, Argentina's President Javier Milei, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. For the first time in nearly 40 years, all 5 major center-left parties united behind Lula's candidacy in opposition to Brazil's rising far right. Lula currently leads opinion polls with a small margin over Senator Bolsonaro, whose father is serving a 27-year sentence under house arrest for an attempted coup.
Cuba has suffered another nationwide blackout after the country's electricity grid collapsed, according to a state-run power utility. Around 10 million people were plunged into darkness on Sunday. The outage, the first in August, comes after several major nationwide blackouts in July as the island faces fuel shortages driven by US sanctions. The government has introduced measures to ease energy shortages, but officials say improvements will take time. Coming up after the break, the US curbs business and tourist visas. African and Central Asian countries face tougher penalties for flouting the rules. Welcome back to A News. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has been reappointed as the country's government following the formation of a new parliamentary majority. The move marks the beginning of a new term for Pashinyan, who will now oversee the appointment of his cabinet and set the government's legislative agenda.
Nikol Pashinyan was reappointed Prime Minister of Armenia on Sunday, hours after the government formally resigned as the newly elected National Assembly convened for its first sitting. Armenian President Vahan Khachaturian signed a decree appointing Pashinyan under Article 149 of the Armenian Constitution. Pashinyan was nominated by the ruling Civil Contract Party, which won 64 of the 105 seats in the National Assembly in the 7th of June parliamentary elections. Earlier on Sunday, Pashinyan submitted the government's resignation in accordance with Article 158 of the Constitution, which requires the government to resign on the day the newly elected parliament holds its first session. The resignation and subsequent reappointment are part of Armenia's constitutional process for forming a new government following parliamentary elections. Under the constitution, cabinet ministers will continue serving in a caretaker capacity until a new government is formed. Pashinyan is now expected to nominate members of his new cabinet, after which the government will begin its new term and present its policy agenda.
On to this regional story now. The US is tightening its visa rules as part of efforts to improve immigration compliance. A new policy requires some visitors to pay a refundable security bond before traveling. A News correspondent Civil Rajapova has more on the story.
The U.S. State Department has announced that from the 3rd of August, visa bonds will become a permanent requirement for citizens of 50 countries applying for B1 business and B2 tourist visas. Under the program, consular officers may require applicants to pay a refundable bond of $10,000, $15,000 or $20,000. The measure is designed to ensure visitors leave the United States before their authorized stay expires. The deposit is returned automatically once the visa holder departs on time or if entry to the U.S. is denied. The program was first introduced as a pilot in August 2025, before being expanded earlier this year. The list is based primarily on visa overstay rates. Out of the 50 countries, the largest share, 29, are in Africa. In Asia, it covers 8 countries, including Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, while Georgia is the only country from the South Caucasus on the list. The program also includes several Pacific Island nations and 6 countries from Latin America and the Caribbean, including Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. According to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, visa overstays among nationals from countries covered by the program fell from more than 45,000 to fewer than 50 during its first 10 months, although visa issued to those countries also declined by 83%. The announcement follows a separate U.S. proposal to introduce a $100,000 financial bond for certain green card applicants as Washington continues studying immigration and visa compliance measures. Sibiri Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Joining me now for more on the story, I'm joined by Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics at University College Dublin in Ireland. Thank you so much, Prof, for your time.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Now, let me get your thoughts first, Professor, on what's really driving Washington to make this visa bond program permanent.
Well, first of all, Donald Trump likes anything where he thinks the United States is getting a bit of free money. And of course, if you charge citizens of other countries $20,000 to come to the United States, whether on business, whether as a student, whether just as a tourist, that is money that you have effectively taken from those citizens and those other nations. But there's a wider goal here, which is the drive of key Trump advisors, and in particular a man named Stephen Miller, which is not only to crack down on undocumented immigrants, something that we hear about quite often during the Trump years, but also to crack down on legal immigration as well. Miller has said that he wants to reduce immigration by 50 to 75%. And of course, students and business people are legal immigrants into the United States. Now, the Trump folks will come out and they'll say that this is necessary because of overstays of visas. You just heard your correspondent refer to that. But first of all, overstays of visas are not really that serious an issue, indeed, for people from Azerbaijan. And secondly, many of the countries on that list do not have a high rate of overstay by their citizens. African countries in particular get targeted simply because they're countries in Africa. This was the case when this was floated back in August of 2025. Some people noted that. The Trump folks are hoping now, almost a year later, they can just push this through and no one's going to raise any kind of fuss about it.
I'm glad you mentioned Africa because nearly 30 African countries are on that list. Why do you think the policy falls so heavily on Africa?
Donald Trump doesn't like African countries, and neither do a lot of his advisors. And I'm not going to repeat here for your viewers what Donald Trump has called African countries. It's language that I wouldn't use in polite company. But Trump has been this way, not even just as a politician. He's been this way when he was a businessman. And there are others in the administration who, quite frankly, and again, let me be honest here, they pursue a kind of white nationalism. Indeed, if you want to put this in a wider context, the only immigrants that the Trump folks have welcomed, indeed have encouraged, trying to call them refugees, have been whites from South Africa. And of course, many people who are from Africa are not white. They're of another color. So that's part of the reason for it. Part of it also is that in some cases you put political pressure on some of these countries to do what you want. But the primary effort here is that for the Trump folks to show dominance, and we know in terms of the war that they're involved in the Middle East, that's one way of attempting dominance. Another way of attempting dominance is what they've done in Latin America, including with Venezuela. This is a different type of economic and cultural dominance that they're pursuing.
Mm-hmm. Now let's bring it back to the region. And when you look at Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, they are also included, but Uzbekistan isn't. What do you read into this in particular?
Well, that's because there's certain politics that's going on between Uzbekistan and the United States. Indeed, not just during the Trump administration. This goes to the aftermath of 9/11, when the leadership in Uzbekistan, very much an authoritarian rule, cultivated the Americans. You might remember that American military were allowed to put bases there after 9/11 and amidst the war in Iraq in 2003. And that's still the case with Uzbekistan, that they still have maintained those links, that they're part of an American security effort. So they've sort of escaped because of that, rather than any fundamental difference between them and surrounding countries.
All right, so Washington presents this as a way of tackling visa overstays, but could affected countries then see it as unequal or even discriminatory treatment? I mean, you mentioned how he views Africa in a very derogatory term that he uses publicly.
Of course they view it that way. I mean, you know, and let's be honest here. I mean, there are some countries on the list where you've got issues regarding the percentage of overstay, but the American system already has measures to deal with those who overstay. It always has enforcement mechanisms, and you simply apply those. You don't need to slap $20,000 bonds on everyone who's, you know, who comes to the United States, when the vast majority will not overstay their visas. But I think the wider issue here is how does that affect U.S. relations with these countries? Now, Donald Trump's inner circle might not care about those African countries. To be honest with you, they might not care about Central Asian countries. But think about it. You're going to limit the number of students who go to the United States, who benefit from U.S. universities, who quite often have a good impression of America from being, you know, a student. I know many folks who have benefited from that. That may be limited now. You have many businessmen who may think, well, do I really want to do business in America when I'm being charged this amount up front? Maybe I'll think about going somewhere else. And of course, you have many tourists who think, well, no, I'll go to Europe. I'll go to other parts of Africa, other parts of Asia. Why should I go to the United States? So you're going to have an effect on American soft power because of this. You know, when America is seen not as a country that welcomes others, but as an America which effectively says, if you want to come see us, pay us for the privilege, that will dent the reputation of America, even if that might not concern Donald Trump or his inner circle.
Now, let's look at the wider geopolitical picture here, Prof. Could this hand China or even Russia an opportunity to strengthen their influence in African and Central Asian countries?
Yeah, I think Russia's tied down right now because of the invasion of Ukraine, which is what now full-scale invasion in its 5th year. So it limits how much the Russians can use this. But no, the Chinese are going to try to exploit any political opportunity from this dent in the American image, the soft power I talked about. That's been the case for years. The Chinese, of course, will promote themselves as a place that is welcoming. They'll promote themselves in terms of regional cooperation. You folks in Azerbaijan know that very well. But that's also true in Africa, where China has tried to increase its economic, its political, and its cultural footprint. You know, you have an interesting contrast here. Even here in Ireland, you know, at my university, you have a Confucius Institute that hails, that promotes, you know, the culture of China, the politics of China, and to be honest with you, the leadership of China. And China has universities that are welcoming people in to say, look at how great we are. You know, if the Trump administration at the same time is saying, look, we don't care if you benefit from seeing us, you know, China is going to build on that. You know, there's a longer game here, which is in play in terms of political influence. But Donald Trump, if he doesn't try to rig the American electoral system, only has another 2.5 years in office. So that longer game isn't necessarily something he's focused on.
That's all we have time for. Professor Scott Lucas, thank you so much for your insights on A News.
Thank you very much, and thank your viewers.
At least 14 people have been killed in a suspected suicide attack outside a police station in northwestern Pakistan. The blast happened in the Swat district. The dead include 5 police officers and 8 civilians. The assailant is also believed to be among those dead. The Pakistan militant group is claimed the responsibility for the assault that has left over a dozen who were injured. That's the news for this hour. Thank you so much for joining me at Tim Tongana. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.